Let's have a word of prayer because we got started in this last week and was talking about the Day of Atonement, because the Day of Atonement has so much in it that we so easily miss. That we're going to go through the Day of Atonement because everything in the Old Testament, temple worship and so on, are illustrations of the coming Messiah, who he is, his person, and his work, what he accomplished, what.
Recording in progress.
Sorry, I haven't been able to get in, so.
Oh, haven't you? Well, I'll talk louder than that. So let's get started with the word of prayer as we are. Thank you, Lord, for this portion of your word and this time for us to share together. We know you're the teacher, so we ask you to work in our understanding and our heart. And not only give us an understanding, but change our hearts to draw from you what is necessary to be obedient and to walk in a faithful, fruitful way. Thank you for this time in Jesus' name. Amen. We're in Leviticus 16 because Leviticus 16 is dealing with the Day of Atonement. And the Day of Atonement in the Old Testament was a picture of God's ways when he comes in the person of the Messiah and brings to conclusion his work of redemption and his way of working with mankind during this age. And it's different. So we're going to be looking at the picture and then draw some conclusions with it. And some of the conclusions I'm going to offer, I believe are true, but the Old Testament doesn't say this. This is what I can see from what is being done, how that is a form or a foreshadowing of something in the future to the people here during the age of law. So we started last week in chapter 16 and verses 6 and 11, where it tells us that on the Day of Atonement, the high priest had to first, before he dealt with Israel's sin. You know, the Day of Atonement is a national observation. It's only something done once a year, and it's done by the whole nation. And the whole nation, many as could, would come out to the temple or the tabernacle to do this. When we look at Jesus' life and put it, read down through the events of his 3-year ministry, we see so many of them are surrounding going to the temple on the Day of Atonement. It's peppered all through his ministry because it was revealing him, and it was really revealing what he was there for and what he was doing. So it's very interesting to try to keep both realities in mind when you're reading the picture alone. That's kind of what we're doing this morning. So, just I'll read the first couple words again from verses 6 and 11. You've got them right there where he says that the Aaron, who was the high priest at this time, shall offer the bull for the sin offering, which is for himself, that he may make atonement, covering for himself and for his household. So the Day of Atonement started for the high priest, going into the tabernacle and making atonement for himself. He's a sinner, and so is his family. And it starts there, and it starts with the blood of the bull. So it's a blood sacrifice. That's pretty obvious what it's foreshadowing. The shedding of a sacrificial animal, in this case, was picturing the sacrifice of God in the person of Christ as he shed his blood for sin. And of course, we know each accomplished different things. But you gotta say, even in the Old Testament, it satisfied God at that time to have it covered up. That was propitious. It satisfied God. Now, it doesn't satisfy God anymore because it isn't sufficient. And he himself in his word has written that the blood of bulls and goats never satisfied. Never really dealt with the sin question completely. So begin with he and a sacrifice offered to God for himself. If he's going to serve God, he's got to, and his family, he and his family have to be separately in first place before he does anything else, has to have bloodshed for that. And it says in I think it was verse 11. Yeah, then Aaron shall offer the sin offering, the bull, which is for not the nation. This is a national holiday. This, he said, this blood for himself, make atonement for himself and for his household. And he shall slaughter the bull, the sin offering, which is for himself. So it started out with the high priest offering blood for himself and for his family. And then verses 12 and 12, after he's done that, then in verses 12 and 13, he moved on, once that was completed, to the fact where he went out and got coals off the altar sacrifice. He got burning coals from off the altar and a couple handfuls of the incense. And he went inside the veil and he put the incense on the fire before the Lord, that the cloud of incense may cover the mercy seat that's on the ark of the testimony, lest he die. So he put he walked in there with a fire pan full of hot coals in one hand and the incense in the other. And he went in before the Lord, and then he took the incense and put it on the burning coals, which of course made smoke. And what does the word tell us that this altar of incense smoke represented? Prayers of, in this case, the people of Israel and him as high priest, because people had lived the whole year and they had their sins dealt with. They had walked through the difficulties of life just like we and I do. And so through the year, it's saying all the prayers that people were during that previous year to praise and worship, and as well as to obtain God's blessings, whatever was needed. All that was represented by this act that the high priest did next. First, he covered himself and his family with blood. And then he went in and poured this incense on the coals. And it just represents all the prayers that people had prayed to the Lord throughout that year. And some believe also that it was the way that the priest was preparing for the coming sacrifices yet to be made. But they were praying that the smoke was also represented the protection for that particular day. Because mankind, in obedience to God's demands, was dealing with sin, the sin of a nation, not just the sin of an individual, but the sin of the nation. Serious business. And it has to do with sin. And it has to do with focusing on it here, like in verse 13, toward the end of that verse, it says that the incense may cover the mercy seat that's on the ark of the testimony. And then it says, lest he die. This was so serious to God that if Aaron or the high priest wasn't faithful in doing what he's supposed to be doing, it was a matter of life and death to him. I'd say that's pretty serious. This wasn't no slight thing to God. And so I think anytime someone is interfacing with the Lord around their sin, that's serious business. God sees it so very serious. We ought to too, because it's picturing something about the Lord in the future, that when the Messiah comes and he's dealing with sin and we're dealing with sin, he has an intercessory ministry that is only being pictured here in the Old Testament, and how faithful God is at taking care of sin. He always takes care of it. And he said, and later we're going to take it just a little bit further as we're relating it to the life of a believer today. What was being pictured back then concerning the intercessory work of the Lord in our lives around sin. So we'll kind of come back to that. Now, this whole chapter several times is kind of unique in that it will deal with a certain topic, and then it'll move on. And then you'll go a little further, and it'll go back to the first thing he was dealing with, only adding to it what he did. He said it the first time. And it'll do that more than once in here. It'll go back in this very one chapter to an earlier phrase or statement, and then pick up on it, but there's been stuff in between. Kind of reminds me of the book of Revelation. You know, what's the book of Revelation? What could you divide it into most easily? Wouldn't you say something to the nature of, it's kind of in three pieces?
Yep.
You know, it deals with three series of judgments. You got the seals, you got 7 seals, followed by 7 trumpets, which are followed by 7 vials, depends what translation you use, vials or cups or of judgments. But those 3 series of judgments have interruptions in them. And a lot of times we think of them as parenthetical passages, because they're passages that don't deal with an issue at that time. If you're in the trumpet, or if you're in the seals, the trumpets and the bowls, you're in the middle of that, and all of a sudden you'll come to a topic completely, you can't say completely, but it has got to do with the issue that's the judgments that are being dealt with. In school, they call those intercalations. They said, don't use the word parentheses. Use the word intercalation. A parenthesis assumes that it's explaining something that was just being talked about. Not so in these cases in Revelation. Those are sections that deal with something different for a different reason. And those intercalations are 3 big ones, 3 sections in Revelation. So here you've got one thing going on, judgments, 3 series of judgments. And then you've got three sections of information and revelation that that is needed to know, but it doesn't have to do with that particular set of judgments. That's all I'm gonna say, but it's kind of weird. Because if you were reading along not knowing any better, you'd be reading about a judgment, and it would go into this section that has nothing to do with it. You say, like the fall of Satan and all kinds of things. Unless you're aware of that, you would really get your mind kind of twisted up trying to make it match, trying to make it go along with the judgments that were just being described. I said too much on it, but that's what's happening here in chapter 16 of Leviticus. We're seeing sections, and then you'll go back to them in different times. And they often are indicated to us with a time word, and it's the word then. See, we just got done reading 16 verse 6 and 11, and then we're going to move on to verse 14. Moreover, he should take some of the blood of the bull and sprinkle it with his finger on the mercy seat on the east side, also in front of the mercy seat. He shall sprinkle some of the blood with his fingers 7 times. So we've got the blood issue dealt with, followed with the prayer section. And then you see how verse 15 starts out with a time word. Then. So what we're going to read now follows after Aaron's cleansing of himself and his family, and the prayers of the whole nation before him. All this is telling us, I think, it looks forward to Christ as as our faithful intercessor. Now, he says, then, after that, in other words, he goes back. I'm just going to read verse 14 again, once more. No, 15. Then he shall slaughter. No, I was right, 14. Moreover, he shall take some of the blood, sprinkle with his finger on the mercy seat 7 times. In order to do that, he had to leave the tabernacle and go out to the altar of sacrifice to get the blood. And so now he's gone back out to get this basin of bull blood. And he re-enters, comes back into the holy place, and then into the Holy of Holies for the whole nation. And he sprinkles the blood on the mercy seat, and he does it with his finger. We were talking about the word mercy, and mercy here, the mercy seat, is, yes, it's the place of where that's propitious. It's the place where satisfaction of God is made, and it's over the mercy seat, and it's it has to do with, this word comes from this word. They're related. What is propitiatory? And it comes from this word, which means the price of a life. What is taken into before God and sprinkled is what God required, what God demanded for the price of life. The wage of sin is
death.
Yeah. That's the price. And that we know from the New Testament very clearly. And in the Old Testament, the price that was being paid was blood, but it was not that which truly, completely satisfies God in the issue of sin, because it didn't take away sin, it just covered it up. They did with sin what God told them to do with sin. That made God happy. that satisfied that point. So, but what made him happy was it represented the price of the life. And in fact, it's translated in some other places as with the word ransom. We use the word ransom. It's a familiar word. If someone steals one of your little children and says, you give me $1 million, you can have your little child back. The ransom in that case would be $1 million. It's the price that they're demanding for that life. And that's a ransom. That's what's involved with the blood sacrifice as far as it being propitious, as far as satisfying God. It pays the price of the sin. And here he's doing that for not an individual, but for the nation. They evaluated the sins of the nation. And those were part of the prayers that went before the Lord. And that's who he's representing here in verse 14, that he'll sprinkle this blood on the mercy seat. Something else in this verse that kind of interested me, and I never got a complete satisfying answer to myself. He says he sprinkled with his finger on the mercy seat on the east side. What side? I wish I had the picture of the tabernacle. But which side is the east side?
The right side. Well, I don't know how you're looking.
North, east, south, or west? Yeah, it's east. Yeah, it's east. And so he says here,
Is the entrance on the
they'll
east side?
sprinkle it on the east side, also in front of the mercy seat. Now, you know where the mercy seat is. What's between the what's between the mercy seat and the holy place?
The veil.
Yeah, there's a curtain there, there's a veil there. Well, if he sprinkles, it says on the east side, isn't that the same side? But it says here, he sprinkled with his finger the mercy seat on the east side, also in front of the mercy seat. And all I'm thinking of, there's nothing there but a space, and then some curtain,
And some ground.
and some, yeah, ground or whatever the floor is made of.
The exit door and the incense and then the sacrifice would be all in front.
That's on the other side of the veil.
Well, yeah.
The only answer because I wanted to know what other people who studied far beyond what I studied had to say about this. I didn't find any of them saying anything. Frustrating. So, but I did notice that there are places where God's talking about the altar of incense and the Holy of Holies is a unit. And so it's almost as if it's part of the Holy of Holies, but it's God left it on that side of the curtain because it ministers and is needed by individuals and people. It's not part of who God is in that sense. But there's spots here, in places here where he'll mention the mercies, he'll mention the altar of incense when he's talking about the Holy of Holies and the mercy seat. It's kind of, in my mind, I see it kind of as a unit, but that curtain's in there. So when he says he sprinkles it here, also in front of the mercy seat, my first question was, well, where's the front? Well, to me, that's the east side. And so that's saying that he not only sprinkled 7 times with his finger blood on the mercy seat itself, but also on that altar of incense that has such intimate relationship with God. It's where the genuine faith is expressed, where the prayers, the intercession, and the intimacy between God and an individual man. They're so entwined and so interrelated that he talks about them as if they're one unit. That's the only thing I can, did you find something? Oh,
I just have a layout of the,
yeah,
of what it looks like. So.
so, and what would that imply about the person and work of Christ? Is he our Redeemer?
Yes.
Is he our blood sacrifice? Does he also have a special relationship with us in which we communicate
Mhm.
very closely and intimately?
Well, because of his sacrifice, the veil was torn, so there is no stopping us from going into the Holy of Holies with him present.
In a sense,
Mhm.
you are the Holy of Holies. But that's such a close unit. I think that's why in the Old Testament picturing of the coming Messiah, he was emphasizing here that our relationship, our prayer life, our communication with him is so close. There might be a curtain between us at that time, but just like you said, now the curtain's gone. And if we're looking toward what was being foreshadowed, we're seeing God is my blood sacrifice that satisfies the righteousness of God. And he is also my means of communication and intimacy with God. And it's so unique and part of my salvation that you can't separate it. That's what I take from it is, you may not take that from, but that's what I take from it. That the altar of incense is part of that package, if you want to call it that, of God's relationship with the sinner once the sin is dealt with, whether it's covered up back in or whether it's gotten rid of in the New Testament in our days. Just a thought. Our prayers are very precious to God. And as much of a part of our salvation as anything could be. He is we use, I know we even have a song called El Shaddai, right? And what does that mean? When we're singing about God as being El Shaddai, what are we emphasizing?
All sufficient.
He's the all-sufficient one. He's the all-sufficient one. Anything in our lives that is needed, he's got in his hand. I like Psalm 73 that makes mention of one of our benefits is God has, as a believer, God has me by my right hand. He's got a hold of me. I don't have a hold of him. That's not God's way. God's way is he's got a hold of us. That's why it's sure. If I had a hold of him, my grip might slip. I might let go. If I was in the middle of the dark and woods in the middle of the night with my dad, and he's got my hand in his, I'm safe. But if I was holding on to him, I might trip or something and let go and be lost. You're not gonna believe that anymore, accept it. Here it's he's got his hand on us. He's got his grip on us. So I'm trying to see what to leave out. 7 times sprinkled on the mercy seat, 7 times in front of it, which to me speaks of the completeness of what the Redeemer is going to be doing when it comes to redemption and salvation. And now we're going here's one of the places where now we got to go back. We go back to verse 5 and take a read here. It speaks about the goats. after the first part of the Day of Atonement. Then after that's taken care of, then according to verse 5, he shall take from the congregation of the sons of Israel 2 male goats for a sin offering and 1 ram for a burnt offering. See, now he's going back. He's already got the day started with his sacrifices and so on. And now he's going to bring up the issue of the goats. And we'll have to read verses 8 through 10, 3 verses here, where it speaks about what he wants them to do with these animals, these 2 animals here, the 2 goats. 8 through 10 is Aaron shall cast lots for the 2 goats. Casting lots is something like, I don't know, what would you compare it to these days? Dice?
Yeah.
Kind of like throw the dice.
Draws
I got 2 goats here, and I got one dice represents one, and the other dice represents the other.
flip a coin.
Flip a coin, you kind of thing. That's right, Jeff. And Aaron shall cast lots for the 2 goats. Well, what are they determining? 1 lot for the Lord. This is what I want him to say. One's for the Lord, and the other's for the scapegoat. What could that possibly mean in looking forward to the coming Messiah?
They're specifically male goats.
And these are male goats. They're a different name for women goats, female goat.
You said female goats.
Yeah.
Probably it's to someone who knows about
The
them.
nanny goat, yeah.
Nanny Yeah,
Works for me.
so he cast lots to determine one for the Lord and what was it? One for the,
Azazel.
yeah, for the scapegoat. Azazel, if their pronunciation is correct. These Hebrew words are odd. I try, but follow what they say. And it just means it's that it's a scapegoat. And what was going to be determined was which one would be slain. The one for the Lord would be slain, but the one for scapegoat would be set free. They would lay their hands on it like he was the slain one. They would lay their hands on it for representing the passage of my guilt to the animal, so on. And then they would sacrifice the animal and shed its blood. The scapegoat, they did the same thing. They'd lay their hands on this scapegoat. And then they would set the scapegoat free. I'll tell you what I think that represents. But it was interesting because I found a little history on it, because their way of doing things changed a little bit as time goes by. And it got to be where they would set this goat free, but somebody had hold of it. Oh, let me back up too. Once they determined which one was for the Lord and which one was for scape, they had, I think it was purple, scarlet cloth. They would have a scarlet cloth, piece of scarlet cloth, and they would tie it to the horns of to identify which one was for the Lord and which one was for scape. So they'd sacrifice the one that was for the Lord, and they would identify him with this scarlet cloth. And then, but it was wound, I said on the horns, I forget that, I was wrong. It's, they put the scarlet cloth around his neck. They tie it around his neck. And the scapegoat, they would tie the scarlet cloth to his horns. And that identified which was which. And so they would return from that point to the brazen altar to make the sacrifice, shed the blood and so on, of the one that was for the Lord. And then they would take that scapegoat out and set it free, and then it was supposed to wander and never be found, seen again. What they ended up doing is they had a priest who would take it out down the valley, up the garden of Olive Garden,
Yes, they were.
yeah, the Mount of Olives.
Oh, my gosh, okay.
And then take it further out about 5 miles or so. And what they would do with it out there was he would take the scarlet cloth off his horns. And what they would do would be lead him over to a precipice. And then just suddenly push him off this precipice to fall to his death, you know. And to show that it was done, when this priest would get back into the temple area, he would give that scarlet cloth to prove that the job was done. See, now you don't see that in the original writings. That's something that they developed over time of doing what they think the Bible, what God was telling them to do. Where does that tie into a foreshadowing of the Messiah? Can you
Well,
think
they
of it
tried to
yet?
push him off a cliff.
Yeah, they tried to make him go away.
Did he not go to the cross, shed his blood as the blood sacrifice?
Mhm.
Yeah, we have no trouble with that.
Mhm.
And when they got done with that, they took him off the cross, and the government didn't care what, they would just let him lie on the cross forever. But his ministry wasn't over with just the shedding of blood. He went into the grave, not a fancy place. It's like the wilderness, going into he went into the wilderness, buried, and then rose the third day. But he was not honored after his death, except by later with the believers. But his life ministry would be the blood sacrifice, but there's more that follows. And it's that he rose again to work and justify and draw and save individuals. His work was not over. He still ministered for another period of time after his death, burial, and resurrection. And I think this picture is kind of saying, this is my opinion, I think it's saying that Christ is not only my substitute, my sin debt payer, but he's also the one who continually, his blood continually cleanses me. I like 1 John 1:9, if you'll confess your sins, he's faithful, he's just to forgive us our sins, and it doesn't stop there. What follows? What's else he do?
Cleanses us from all
He
unrighteousness.
cleanses us from all unrighteousness. I think that's what the scapegoat is for. God knew, he says, I'm going to demonstrate to you that there's a sacrifice of blood that satisfies me. And that satisfaction also provides a wherewithal for your constant cleansing. You're cleansed with the sacrifice, you're also cleansed with a constant, in a sense, he was saying that goat kind of represents me as a laver. You're not only getting a blood sacrifice, but you're also getting cleansing, constant cleansing. And I think that's what the scapegoat was. even though God was on the Day of Atonement dealing with the sins of Israel, he knows Israel's not gonna be good this coming year in every way. And so he's not only with the two goats, he's not only showing the blood sacrifice, but he's also showing covering of the cleansing that's gonna be needed for those who come forth throughout the coming year. That's just my opinion, but I think that's what he's showing here. That's a foreshadowing, and to me, that I would say that's a foreshadowing of Christ as my assurance. He's not only my savior, he's my guarantee of cleansing when I fail. Especially when I fail, when people don't, maybe I don't even see it, don't even recognize the failure. But God's got it covered with his let go. Azazel, if that's how they pronounce it, but it's our assurance. And so I don't want to jump over too much here. So that's the foreshadowing, I think. And then we come to verse 20. I think verse 20 starts with the then.
And
When he finishes atoning for the holy place and the tent of meeting and the altar, he shall offer the live goat. He goes on, and Aaron shall lay both of his hands on the head of the live goat, confess over it all the iniquities of the sons of Israel and their transgressions in regard to all their sins, and he shall lay them on the head of the goat and send it away. I think that's how it was originally done. And I don't know, they would get it far enough out in the desert that it wouldn't know its way home anyway. But that would be, and then whoever took him out there would come home, leave him out there. Send it away to the wilderness by the hand of a man who stands in readiness. So he said, see, that it should be taken out there by someone, a person who's prepared to. And the goat shall bear on itself all the iniquities to a solitary land. And he shall release the goat in the wilderness. Where do I want to go from here? I want to go from here to verse 15. It finishes talking about all of these sacrifices, and the blood from these goats would be sprinkled the same as the blood from the bull sacrifice. Now let's go to 20 to 22. And he finishes atoning for the holy place. Finishing for the holy place. Atoning for the holy place. Do we make, we don't do stuff like that. We don't make sacrifices in this way for our church building. But they had to atone for the holy place and the tent of meeting and the altars. See, there was sacrifices being made for though the altars and the ministry of the priesthood. He shall offer the live goat, and this spelled out here that, dude, we're not going to take time to read it, but they did a sacrifice for the Holy of Holies and for the holy place. And they did sacrifice for the tent of the meeting. Why would they do that? Because all that is resident right here in amongst the midst of a sinful nation. Even the things that that were being used by God, if they're involved in our life, it has need for cleansing. And I've never given that kind of a thought. You know, you're an individual in the New Testament day in the church age. Let me back up. In the old, in the law, in the age of law, all these things given by God for us, for mankind to do, for giving of the law, all these things had to be sanctified. All these things had to be given the sacrifice for. You think there's a foreshadowing of that in the church age as well? That everything that I do for the Lord should be sanctified. It's special, it's unique. Whatever God has you involved in is of His demand for your life. But have you dedicated that part of your life to Him? Have you actually stopped long? I ask myself that question. Have I stopped long to thank God for giving me whatever He got me doing? And to set that part of my life aside and dedicated to Him in a very unique. Romans tells us something similar to that. That we should see how that go. Dedicate our worship. Right thing to do is to set our lives apart for Him. And so even the things like the tabernacle, later the temple, and all the utensils and everything had to be dealt with because they're here in a sinful environment. We're here in a sinful environment. Even though we're believers, we live in a sinful environment. And we need to be careful about the environment's influence on us. I think that's why He had them do that too. You're coming here to this tabernacle to worship me, to follow my instructions, to shed blood, to do what I told you was necessary by me. And don't think you're going to do that with undedicated means. I've given you the tabernacle, I've given you all that's necessary. Dedicate that to me in your life. That's what I think He's getting at here. And the other thing I wanted to mention too about the, let's stop at this. At the end of the scapegoat issue, my notes I had written down, they let that go out. The Mount of Olives, about 12 miles further in the wilderness, split the scarlet cloth and tied half to the goat's horn, and then pushed him backwards to its death over a precipice. Kind of like Jesus was being treated after His blood was shed. And an interesting note that I found in my studies was that there's a Jewish tradition to this very day, as far as I know, that when that scarlet cloth was taken off the horn before they shoved them over this precipice, they take that scarlet cloth off to take it back. And according to Jewish tradition, from the time of Christ until I think it was 70 AD, the destruction of Jerusalem, that scarlet piece of cloth on the way back would always turn white. That's what they believe.
That sounds like a Catholic.
Yeah. And then after that, it stopped turning white. Just an interesting bypass. All right, well, we'll stop here and pick up next week, finish next week, talking about the propitiatory work of itself, of mercy seat, And we'll be able to finish the series with that. Any quick thoughts? Quick, just ran out. Let's have a word. Well, thank you for. I think that we see from your word that leads us to understand a little more clearly who Christ, your son, is, and what his ministry was like, what he's involved. And we're thankful that you have a way of showing us that we can understand a little clearer. And we desire, Lord, that it bear fruit in our lives as a result. In Jesus' name, we're looking forward to what you have in the following service. Amen.